The glass slipper shattered against the marble floor of the ballroom, and my stepmother's face went white as snow. Not from the broken crystal, though each shard cost more than she'd spent on my entire childhood, but from the woman materializing in the center of the glittering fragments, her form coalescing from stardust and moonlight. My fairy godmother had arrived, and she looked absolutely furious. "Did you really think," the ethereal being said, her voice like wind chimes dipped in venom, "that mocking a child's belief in magic would have no consequences?" I smiled from my position at the top of the grand staircase, my hand resting on the shoulder of Crown Prince Alessandro, watching my stepmother, stepsisters, and my weak-willed father realize that every fairy tale they'd scorned me for believing was about to come devastatingly true. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really began, or rather, where it ended the first time around. The poison burned through my veins like liquid fire as I collapsed over my exam papers. Around me, the other students gasped and screamed, but I could barely hear them through the ringing in my ears. My vision blurred, and the last thing I saw was my stepsister Veronica's face. Not shocked, not horrified, but satisfied, triumphant. She'd done this. She'd poisoned me to steal my scholarship, my one chance at escape from the hell that was living in my father's house. I died on that exam room floor at 19 years old, my dreams of becoming a professor of folklore and mythology dying with me. The scholarship to Oxford that would have been mine went to Veronica instead, bought with my blood. But here's where my story diverges from tragedy and enters the realm of the impossible. Because I didn't stay dead. I woke up on my 7th birthday in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by the battered fairy tale books that had been my only comfort through the years. My mother's books, my real mother, the one who died when I was 6, the one who had filled my head with stories of magic and wonder before my father remarried and brought Veronica and Victoria, my stepsisters, into our home. At first, I thought it was a dream, or heaven, or hell. But as the days unfolded exactly as I remembered them, my father's announcement that he was getting remarried, the arrival of Clarissa and her daughters, the slow erosion of everything that had been mine, I understood the truth. I had been given the rarest of gifts, a second chance. No, not just a second chance. Foreknowledge. I remembered everything from my first life, every betrayal, every cruelty, every time they'd mocked me for believing in fairy tales while they stole my possessions, my dignity, and eventually my life. And I remembered something else, something I'd forgotten in the desperate scramble of my first life. I remembered the night before my mother died, when she pressed an ancient leather-bound book into my 7-year-old hands and whispered, "Magic is real, Alara. Never stop believing. When you need it most, help will come. You just have to ask the right way." I had dismissed it as the ramblings of a feverish, dying woman. But now, living my childhood over again with adult knowledge, I understood what I had missed. My mother had been trying to teach me magic. Let me paint you a picture of the 12 years that followed my rebirth. Not the whole sordid tale, we'd be here all day, but enough for you to understand why what I eventually did to them was not just deserved, but necessary. It started small. Clarissa moved into our home 3 months after that 7th birthday, and within a week, my mother's portrait was removed from the living room wall. Within a month, all her belongings were boxed up and put in the attic. Within 6 months, I wasn't allowed to mention her name at dinner. "It upsets Clarissa," my father said, not meeting my eyes. "You need to think about others, Alara. You're being selfish." I was 7 years old, grieving my mother, and I was selfish. Veronica and Victoria, 11 and 9 respectively, moved into the room that had been my playroom, forcing me into the smallest bedroom in the house, barely more than a closet. They accidentally broke my mother's music box, her porcelain dolls, every physical memory I had of her. When I cried, Clarissa told me I needed to learn to share and be less attached to material things. This from a woman who bought her daughters new designer clothes every month. By the time I turned 10, I was essentially a servant in my own home. I did the dishes, the laundry, cleaned the house while my stepsisters played. When I protested, my father, weak, pathetic man that he was, told me that I needed to contribute to the household and learn responsibility. Veronica and Victoria apparently needed to learn nothing except how to spend his money and torment me. But here's what made it truly unbearable. They mocked my love of fairy tales. constantly, relentlessly. I would curl up with my mother's old books, Grimm's fairy tales, the Blue Fairy Book, Andersen's stories, and they would snatch them from my hands, read passages in mocking voices, and laugh at me for believing in stupid magic and childish nonsense. Alara thinks a fairy godmother is going to save her, Veronica would shriek with laughter. Maybe a prince will marry her and take her away, Victoria would add, and they'd collapse into giggles, while Clarissa smiled indulgently and my father pretended not to hear. They didn't just mock me. They actively tried to destroy my interest in the stories that had been my mother's legacy. They tore pages from the books, they hid them. They accidentally spilled things on them. When I was 13, they convinced my father to throw half of them away because I was too old for such childish things. I salvaged what I could, hiding the books in various places around the house and in my locker at school. But the damage was done. They had tried to kill the part of me that still believed in wonder, in magic, in the possibility that good could triumph over evil. In my first life, they had nearly succeeded. By the time I was 16, I'd stopped reading the fairy tales. I'd locked that part of myself away, convinced myself that I needed to be practical and realistic if I was going to survive. But in this second life? In this life, I knew better. I knew that magic was real because I was living proof of it. I had died and been reborn. If that wasn't magic, what was? So, instead of letting them break me, I studied. While they mocked me, I read every book on folklore, mythology, and magic that I could find. While they laughed at my fairy tales, I memorized ancient incantations and rituals. While they thought I was a stupid, dreamy fool, I was preparing. Because my mother's final gift, that leather-bound book she'd given me, was no ordinary book. It was a grimoire, a book of real, genuine magic passed down through her family for generations. And one of the spells contained within its pages was a summoning ritual, a ritual to call a fairy godmother. In my first life, I'd never gotten the chance to try it, but in this life, I had 12 years to prepare, to gather the necessary components, to perfect the ritual, and I knew exactly when I would need to use it. The night of the royal charity ball, when Clarissa would take my stepsisters and leave me behind, locked in the house while she wore my mother's diamonds, the ones my father had promised would be mine when I turned 18, and introduced Veronica to Crown Prince Alessandro, the man who would change everything. But I'm still getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the specific cruelties, the ones that made my eventual revenge so perfectly, poetically just. When I was 14, I won a local writing competition for a short story I'd written based on Beauty and the Beast. The prize was $500 and publication in a literary magazine. I was thrilled. It was the first time anyone outside my mother had recognized my love of fairy tales as something valuable, something special. Clarissa found the check before I could deposit it. She deposited it into Veronica's account, claiming that since Veronica was about to start high school, she needed new clothes and a laptop, and I should be generous with my unexpected windfall. My father supported her completely. "Family shares, Alara," he said. "Don't be greedy." I never saw a penny of that money, but I saw Veronica's new wardrobe and her top-of-the-line MacBook Pro. When I was 16, I had saved up enough from my part-time job at the bookstore. Yes, they made me work while my stepsisters got allowances, to buy a beautiful vintage edition of The Fairy Tales of Charles Perrault. It was my birthday gift to myself, something I'd wanted for years. Victoria took it to use as a coaster for her drinks. When I protested, she accidentally spilled vodka all over it, ruining the antique pages. Clarissa said it was my fault for leaving such an important item where it could get damaged, and I should learn to take better care of my things. The book had cost me $300 and 2 months of saving every penny. When I was 17, I applied to Oxford University for their folklore and mythology program. My grades were perfect, my entrance essay was brilliant, and I had teacher recommendations that called me exceptional and once in a generation. The full scholarship would have covered everything: tuition, room, board, even a stipend for books and supplies. Veronica applied to the same program. Her grades were mediocre, her essay was clearly written by someone else. I later found out she'd paid a graduate student to write it, and her recommendations were bought through her mother's connections. I found out about her application when I accidentally saw the paperwork on Clarissa's desk. She was preparing a backup plan in case Veronica didn't get in on her own merits. The backup plan involved sabotaging me. In my first life, I didn't see it coming. Veronica poisoned my morning tea on the day of the final examination, the one that would determine the scholarship winner. I collapsed during the exam, was rushed to the hospital, and by the time I recovered, the deadline had passed. Veronica got the scholarship by default, despite her inferior qualifications. The doctors could never figure out what had made me sick. The investigation went nowhere, and Veronica went to Oxford while I was left behind, forced to attend a local community college because my father refused to pay for anything else. "You had your chance, Alara," he said. "You should have been more careful about what you ate." As if it had been my fault. But the worst, the absolute worst, was what they did with my mother's things. On my 18th birthday, the day I was supposed to receive the jewelry my mother had left for me in her will, Clarissa appeared at breakfast wearing my mother's diamond necklace, the one that had been in my mother's family for 5 generations, the one that was supposed to be mine. "Happy birthday, dear," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I hope you don't mind, but I needed something appropriate to wear to Veronica's scholarship celebration dinner tonight. Your mother would have wanted her jewelry to be worn on special occasions, don't you think?" My father sat there, eating his eggs, and said nothing. When I protested, when I pointed out that the jewelry was mine by legal right, Clarissa's face transformed into something cruel and hard. "You ungrateful little brat," she hissed. "After everything we've done for you, feeding you, housing you, treating you like one of our own daughters, and you begrudge me one necklace for one night? Your father and I have decided that you're not mature enough to handle such valuable items. They'll remain in my care until you learn some gratitude." I never saw them again. Not in my first life. Clarissa wore my mother's jewelry to every important event, and my stepsisters borrowed the pieces for their dates and parties. I learned later that she'd had a jeweler create fake paperwork claiming the pieces had been gifts from my father during their marriage. In my first life, I'd been powerless to stop any of it. But in this life, I watched and I waited and I planned. Because I knew exactly how it would all play out. I knew that Clarissa would continue to steal from me, that my stepsisters would continue to torment me, that my father would continue to enable them. I knew that Veronica would apply to Oxford, that she would plan to poison me, that she would steal my future. And I knew that on the night of the Royal Charity Ball, 6 months before the Oxford exams, everything would come to a head in a way none of them could anticipate. Because this time I would be ready. This time I wouldn't be the victim. This time I would have magic on my side. The day I turned 18 in my second life, I woke up to find my bedroom stripped bare. Clarissa had taken everything while I slept. My books, my mother's photographs, even the quilt my mother had made. The room was empty except for my bed frame, a single sheet, and a note on the pillow. "You're an adult now. Time to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. Consider this your motivation. Love your family." It was the final straw, the last cruelty before the big one. Because in 3 days, the Royal Charity Ball would take place. Crown Prince Alessandro would be attending, looking for a bride. And Clarissa had secured invitations for herself and my stepsisters through a connection of hers, one of the ball's major donors. In my first life, I hadn't known about the ball until the day of, when I'd watched them prepare in beautiful gowns while I was left behind. In this life, I'd been preparing for 6 months. The summoning ritual for a fairy godmother was complex. It required rare ingredients: moonflower seeds, spring water collected at dawn on the vernal equinox, silver dust from a mirror that had reflected true love, and a hair from the summoner's bloodline offered with genuine belief. That last part had been easy. I had my mother's hair preserved in a locket I'd managed to keep hidden. It also required perfect timing. The summoning had to take place on a night of the new moon, at the stroke of midnight, in a place of great emotional significance to the summoner. And most importantly, it required absolute, unshakable belief in magic. That was where most people failed. Even with all the right ingredients and perfect timing, if doubt entered the summoner's heart, the ritual would fail. But I had no doubt, none at all. I had died and lived again. I had been given 12 years of foreknowledge. If that wasn't proof of magic, nothing was. The night of the ball arrived. On a new moon. Perfect. Clarissa swept into my empty room at 6 p.m., my mother's diamonds glittering at her throat and wrists. Behind her, Veronica and Victoria preened in their ball gowns, ice blue and rose pink, expensive and beautiful. "We're leaving now," Clarissa announced. There's bread and peanut butter in the kitchen if you're hungry. Don't wait up. We'll be very late. Actually, I said calmly, I was hoping I could come. The three of them stared at me as if I'd grown a second head. Then Veronica laughed, that cruel, mocking laugh I'd heard 1,000 times. You to the royal ball? In what, Alara? The rags you're wearing? I looked down at my plain jeans and t-shirt. I was hoping. Hoping what? Victoria interrupted. That we'd loan you a dress? That we'd share our night with you? God, you're pathetic. Still living in your fairy tale fantasies, what do you think is going to happen? A fairy godmother will appear and magic you up a pretty dress? They all laughed. Even my father, standing in the hallway behind them, chuckled. The girl needs to learn reality sometime, he said. This is as good a lesson as any. Clarissa smiled. That particular smile that I had learned meant she was about to be especially cruel. You know what? This has given me an idea. She reached up and unclasped my mother's diamond necklace. For one moment, my heart leaped. Was she going to give it back? No, of course not. She walked to my empty window and opened it. Then, dangling the necklace outside, she looked at me. You love your fairy tales so much, Alara. You believe in magic. So here's your chance. I'm going to drop this necklace. If magic is real, if fairy godmothers exist, surely one will catch it for you, right? Mom, don't. Even Victoria looked uncomfortable, but Clarissa let go. I rushed to the window in time to see my mother's necklace. 5 generations of family history, the last real connection I had to her, shatter on the concrete driveway below. The diamonds scattered like tears. Oops, Clarissa said. I guess magic isn't real after all. Come on, girls, we have a prince to meet. They left me there, staring at the broken necklace, and for a moment, just a moment, the old despair from my first life threatened to overwhelm me. They had taken everything. Everything. But then I remembered. This was the necessary ingredient. Great emotional pain. A moment of absolute desperation. This was what the ritual required. I looked at my watch. 8 p.m., 4 hours until midnight. I had work to do. I gathered the ingredients from their hiding places around the house. The moonflower seeds I'd been growing in secret in the overgrown corner of the garden. The spring water I'd collected months ago and kept preserved in a crystal bottle. The silver dust I'd painstakingly scraped from my mother's hand mirror, the one that had sat on her dresser and reflected her face every morning as my father told her he loved her back when his love had been true. And my mother's hair, still safely hidden in the locket around my neck. I went to my mother's garden, or what remained of it. Clarissa had let it become overgrown, dismissing the gardener my mother had employed. But the rose bushes my mother had planted still grew there, wild and untamed. This was my place of emotional significance. This was where my mother had read me fairy tales on summer evenings, where she had died holding my hand and telling me that magic was real. At 11:45 p.m., I began the ritual. I arranged the ingredients in a circle, speaking the words my mother's grimoire had taught me. Ancient words, older than English, older than Latin, words that hummed with power and made the air around me shimmer. The rose bushes began to glow with a soft, silvery light. At 11:59, I added the final ingredient, my mother's hair, burning it in a small dish while I spoke the final incantation. I believe, I whispered. I believe in magic. I believe in fairy tales. I believe that good triumphs over evil and that those who have been wronged will find justice. I believe. I believe. I believe. The clock struck midnight. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the air in the center of the circle began to sparkle like someone was pouring glitter made of starlight. The sparkles coalesced, forming a figure. A woman, tall and elegant, with ageless features and eyes that held the wisdom of centuries. She wore a gown that seemed woven from moonbeams, and she carried a wand that pulsed with soft light. She was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. She was my fairy godmother, and she was real. Well, she said, her voice like music, it's about damn time someone summoned me properly. Do you have any idea how long it's been since anyone had enough genuine belief to make this work? I stared at her, tears streaming down my face. You're real. You're actually real. Of course I'm real, child. Your mother knew it. That's why she left you the grimoire. She knew you'd need it one day. The fairy godmother looked around the overgrown garden, and her expression darkened. She also knew what would happen after she died. She tried to prepare you. I wasn't ready, I whispered. Not in my first life. The fairy godmother's eyes widened. Your first life? Oh, my dear girl, you're a returner. No wonder the magic was so strong. You died, didn't you? They killed you. My stepsister, poison, on the day of my exam. And you came back. Rare, so very rare. She stepped forward and took my hands. Then you know what's coming. You know what they plan to do. I know everything. Every betrayal, every cruelty, everything they took from me. And you want revenge. I want justice. The fairy godmother smiled, and it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of ancient magic, of karmic balance, of forces older than humanity itself. Justice, then? Let me tell you something about fairy godmothers, child. We're not the soft, gentle creatures you see in the sanitized modern versions of the tales. In the old stories, in the real stories, we were fierce. We punished the wicked and rewarded the good. We didn't just give pretty dresses and glass slippers. We gave people exactly what they deserved. What do I deserve? I asked Mikis. Everything they took from you. Everything and more. She raised her wand. But first we need to make an entrance. They're at the ball right now, aren't they? Your stepsisters and stepmother? Yes, meeting the prince, trying to secure a royal marriage for Veronica. Then we'd better hurry. We have a ball to crash and a prince to impress. After all, the best revenge is living well, and living better than those who wronged you. She waved her wand and the world exploded into light. The transformation was nothing like the Disney movies. There was no gentle sparkle, no singing mice, no pumpkin carriage. The magic that surrounded me was wild and fierce, ancient power that crackled through my veins like lightning. My clothes didn't just change, they transformed from the inside out. The worn t-shirt became the finest silk, shimmering like water under moonlight. The jeans became a ball gown that could have made angels weep with envy, midnight blue fading to silver at the hem, embroidered with constellations that actually twinkled. The fabric moved like living starlight, and when I looked down, I saw that the design incorporated every fairy tale motif I'd ever loved. Roses from Beauty and the Beast, apples from Snow White, spinning wheels from Sleeping Beauty, all woven together in intricate silver thread. Your armor, the fairy godmother said. Every girl needs armor for battle, even if that armor happens to be a ball gown. She touched my feet, and glass slippers appeared, but not the fragile, decorative things from the stories. These were strong, powerful, embedded with diamonds that had once belonged to my mother. I recognized them immediately. She had recovered the shattered necklace and transformed it. Your mother's legacy, remade, she said softly. They tried to destroy it. I've made it indestructible. My hair, which I'd been growing out for years, arranged itself into an elaborate updo woven with threads of actual stardust. My face was the same, but somehow more vibrant, more alive, more real. This wasn't a disguise. This was me, but me as I was meant to be. Me without the years of abuse and gaslighting weighing me down. Now, Sapais, the fairy godmother said, Usares, for your transportation. She waved her wand at the overgrown pumpkin patch at the corner of the garden, the one my mother had planted and Clarissa had neglected. One of the pumpkins began to grow larger and larger until it was the size of a car. Then it transformed, but not into a carriage. It became a vehicle that looked like it had driven straight out of a steampunk fantasy. Part vintage Rolls-Royce, part magical construct with wheels that spun with bows, captured starlight and windows that showed different constellations depending on the angle. It was gorgeous, absurd, and absolutely perfect. I've always thought the pumpkin carriage was impractical, the fairy godmother said with a wink. This one is actually comfortable and has excellent suspension. She opened the door for me, and I saw the interior was even more spectacular. Velvet seats, a minibar stocked with sparkling water, because I would need my wits about me, and a mirror that showed not my reflection but glimpses of what was happening at the ball. In the mirror, I could see Veronica and Victoria surrounded by admirers, see Clarissa networking with other wealthy parents, see my father drinking champagne and laughing at some joke. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd broken me. They had no idea what was coming. One more thing, the fairy godmother said. She reached into the air and pulled out a small crystal vial filled with shimmering liquid. Insurance. If anyone tries to harm you, poison in a drink, a physical attack, anything, this protective enchantment will not only shield you, but reflect the harm back to its source threefold. Poetic justice, my dear. She pressed the vial into my hand, and it absorbed into my skin, leaving a faint shimmer like glitter in my veins. Now you need to understand something, the fairy godmother continued, her tone becoming serious. This magic has rules. Real magic always does. The transformation will last as long as you need it to, but there are conditions. Like midnight? I asked, thinking of Cinderella. No, better. The magic will last as long as you believe in it. The moment you doubt, the moment you let their voices back into your head telling you that you're worthless or that magic isn't real, that's when it fades. But I don't think that will be a problem for you, will it? Never again, I said firmly. I'll never doubt again. Good, because tonight isn't just about going to a ball. Tonight is about reclaiming everything they took from you and showing them that they backed the wrong girl. Your stepsister wants a prince? We'll make sure he sees you first and never looks at her again. Your stepmother wants to wear your mother's diamonds? We'll make sure everyone at that ball knows exactly what she is, a thief and a fraud. Your father wants to pretend he's a good man? We'll give him a mirror he can't avoid. How? I asked. She smiled. By being exactly who you are. The girl who never stopped believing in magic even when the whole world told her she was a fool. The girl who knows every fairy tale ever written because they were her mother's legacy. The girl who is brilliant, kind, and powerful, everything they tried to convince her she wasn't. She opened the door wider. Now go. Your destiny awaits. And remember, in the real fairy tales, the princess doesn't wait to be rescued. She rescues herself. I climbed into the magical vehicle, my heart pounding. Through the mirror, I could see the royal palace glittering with lights. The ball was in full swing. One question, I said before she closed the door. Will I see you again? Oh, my dear, the fairy godmother said, her smile widening. I wouldn't miss the finale for anything. When you're ready for the final act, break one of your glass slippers. I'll be there in an instant. Until then, I'll be watching. The door closed and the vehicle began to move, gliding through the streets on wheels of starlight. I watched the city pass by, saw people on the sidewalk stop and stare at the impossible vehicle with its impossible passenger. I was heading to the royal charity ball where my stepfamily thought they'd already won. They had no idea that the real fairy tale was just beginning. The royal palace was even more magnificent than I remembered from my first life. I'd never actually attended the ball before. I'd only seen pictures afterward, including the photo of Veronica standing next to Prince Alessandro that had been published in every newspaper and magazine. The prince was royalty from a small but wealthy European principality that maintained strong ties with our country. He was 24, educated at Cambridge, and according to the tabloids, looking for a bride. His presence at a charity ball in our city had caused a social frenzy, with every wealthy family angling for an introduction. Clarissa had secured invitations through some connection. I'd never learned exactly how in my first life. But she'd been crowing about it for weeks, making sure everyone knew that her daughters would be meeting the prince. As my enchanted vehicle pulled up to the palace entrance, I saw the crowd of guests arriving in their expensive cars and designer gowns. They were impressive, certainly. Old money and new money mingling together, all of them dressed to impress. But when my vehicle appeared, glowing with soft starlight, unlike anything they'd ever seen, the entire crowd fell silent. The vehicle stopped exactly at the red carpet. The door opened by itself and I stepped out. The effect was immediate and electric. Everyone stared. Flashbulbs went off. There were photographers everywhere documenting the charity event. The whispers started immediately. Who is she? What family is she from? I've never seen a dress like that. Those diamonds. I walked up the red carpet with my head high, channeling every ounce of confidence I'd never been allowed to have in my first life. The glass slippers clicked on the marble with a sound like crystalline bells, and with each step, the embroidered constellations on my dress seemed to shift and move. I was magic made manifest, and everyone could see it. At the top of the steps, two servants opened the massive ballroom doors for me. The ball was in full swing, an orchestra playing, hundreds of guests dancing and mingling, champagne flowing. And standing at the center of it all, I saw them. Clarissa, holding court with a group of wealthy donors, my mother's diamonds glittering at her throat. Veronica and Victoria, surrounded by young men, laughing and flirting. And my father, standing off to the side with a drink, looking diminished and small next to Clarissa's confidence. None of them had seen me yet. They were too busy enjoying their triumph. Then the orchestra stopped mid-song. The conductor, an elderly man with keen eyes, had spotted me. He raised his baton for silence and the entire ballroom fell quiet, 1,000 guests turning to see what had captured his attention. I stood in the doorway, framed by light, and watched as recognition slowly dawned on my step-family's faces. Clarissa's mouth fell open. Veronica turned white. Victoria dropped her champagne glass and it shattered on the marble floor, an echo of my mother's diamonds shattering on the driveway. My father simply stared, and for the first time in years, I saw actual emotion on his face. It might have been shock, or shame, or fear. "Alara?" Clarissa breathed, loud enough in the silence that half the ballroom heard. And just like that, everyone knew who I was. The forgotten daughter, the scorned girl, the one they'd mocked for believing in fairy tales, the one who had just proved that magic was real. "Good evening, stepmother," I said, my voice carrying across the ballroom with crystalline clarity. "Thank you so much for the invitation to attend." "Oh, wait, you didn't invite me, did you? You locked me in my room and told me that fairy godmothers weren't real." I smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "I guess you were wrong." The orchestra conductor, understanding the drama unfolding before him, had a sense of theatrical timing that would have made Shakespeare proud. He immediately launched into a waltz, the most dramatic, sweeping waltz in the classical repertoire. And at that exact moment, a man appeared at my side. "Would you honor me with this dance?" he asked. I turned and found myself looking into the eyes of Crown Prince Alessandro. He was more handsome in person than in any photograph. Dark hair, intelligent eyes, and a presence that commanded attention without demanding it. He wore a formal military dress uniform with a sash denoting his royal status. But what struck me most was the genuine warmth in his expression. "Your Highness," I said, executing a perfect curtsy, something I'd practiced obsessively in my second life, knowing this moment would come. "You have me at a disadvantage," he said, his accent giving his English a charming lilt. "You clearly know who I am, but I have no idea who you are, though everyone in this ballroom seems to, judging by the reaction your arrival caused." "My name is Alara Thorne," I said, "and I believe you are about to be introduced to my stepsister." His eyebrows rose slightly. "Thorne? Of course. Your stepmother was quite insistent about an introduction." He glanced over at where Clarissa stood, frozen, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. "Though I suspect that introduction might be delayed." "The dance?" I placed my hand in his. "I would be honored." He led me onto the dance floor, and I saw Veronica's face contort with rage. This was supposed to be her moment, her dance with the prince, her path to a royal marriage. I had just stolen it with a single entrance. "I have to admit," the prince said as we began to dance, "I'm curious. The way you appear, the dress you're wearing, the diamonds. And forgive me for being direct, but you're clearly the most interesting person to arrive all evening. There's a story here, isn't there?" "There is," I said, "but it's not a happy one. At least it hasn't been until tonight." "Tell me," he said simply. So, as we danced, I told him. Not everything, we didn't have time for everything, but enough. I told him about my mother's death, about Clarissa moving in and taking everything, about years of being treated like a servant while my stepsisters were spoiled. I told him about my love of fairy tales and how they'd mocked me for it. I told him about the necklace dropped from the window just hours ago. I didn't tell him about being murdered and reborn. Some truths were too fantastical even for a night of magic. The diamonds you're wearing now, he said, looking at my glass slippers. Those are from the necklace? Transformed, I said. Proof that magic can take something broken and make it stronger. He was quiet for a moment, continuing to lead me through the waltz with practiced ease. Around us, other couples had begun to dance, but I could feel eyes on us, especially my stepfamily's burning stares. You know, the prince said finally, I came to this ball tonight expecting to be bored. My advisor insisted it would be good publicity and that I should meet potential connections. But instead, I find myself dancing with someone who appears to have walked out of a fairy tale. Should I be concerned that you might vanish at midnight? I laughed, genuinely amused. No midnight deadline, Your Highness? That's a different story. Alessandro, he said. Please, if we're going to discuss fairy tales and magic, we should at least be on a first-name basis. Alessandro, I repeated, testing the name. It felt right. The waltz ended and another immediately began. Alessandro didn't release my hand. Would you mind terribly if I monopolized your time this evening? He asked. It's not often I meet someone who believes in magic. I would mind, a sharp voice cut in. Clarissa had materialized beside us, her face a mask of barely controlled fury beneath a veneer of social propriety. Because Alara has no business being here. She wasn't invited, and she has no right to take attention away from her sisters. I'm sorry, Alessandro said, his tone cooling considerably, but I don't believe I was speaking to you, Mrs. Thorne. I'm her stepmother, and I'm responsible for her, Clarissa hissed. She's clearly not well. She's been having delusions about magic and fairy godmothers. Delusions? I interrupted quietly. Is that what we're calling it? Tell me, Clarissa, if I'm delusional, how do you explain this dress? These diamonds that you watched shatter on the driveway? The vehicle that brought me here, which half the city saw. A crowd was gathering now, sensing drama. This was a charity ball filled with society's elite. They lived for gossip like this. You stole money, Clarissa accused. You must have stolen from your father to pay for all this. My father, I said, my voice carrying across the ballroom, who you can see standing right there, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Father, would you like to tell everyone the truth? Or should I? My father looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. He opened his mouth, closed it, and finally managed, Alara, we should discuss this privately. No, I said firmly, Mammy. No more private discussions where you make me feel small and wrong and foolish for believing that I deserve better. Let's discuss it right here in front of everyone. Let's talk about how you let your new wife steal my mother's jewelry, how you let your stepdaughters destroy my mother's belongings, how you worked me like a servant while spoiling them rotten, how you threw away my mother's books and told me I was childish for loving the stories she left me. That's enough, Clarissa snapped. You ungrateful little... No, Alessandro said, and his voice carried the unmistakable weight of royal authority. I think we'd all like to hear more. Please, Alara, continue. So I did. With the prince beside me as witness, with hundreds of society's most influential people listening, I laid it all out. Every theft, every cruelty, every time they'd mocked me for believing in magic while they stole from me and used me. And as I spoke, I saw faces in the crowd changing. Shock, disgust, anger on my behalf. These were people who valued propriety and appearances, and Clarissa had just been exposed as neither proper nor acceptable. These diamonds, I said, pointing to my glass slippers, were my mother's. Clarissa threw them from a window tonight, trying to prove that magic wasn't real, but someone caught them, someone transformed them, and now I'm wearing them to a ball that she told me I could never attend. This is ridiculous, Veronica interjected, pushing through the crowd. She'd clearly decided to take matters into her own hands since her mother was failing. She's lying. She's always been a liar and a dreamer. Everyone knows she's obsessed with stupid fairy tales. I am obsessed with fairy tales, I said calmly. Because fairy tales are about justice. They're about the good being rewarded and the wicked being punished. They're about magic being real for those who believe in it. And right now, standing here in this dress, having arrived in an enchanted vehicle after being saved by a real fairy godmother, I'd say my obsession was pretty well founded, wouldn't you? The crowd murmured. They could see the evidence right in front of them. Whatever they believed about magic, they could see that something extraordinary had happened. Your Highness, Clarissa tried one more time, her voice taking on a pleading tone. Surely you can see this is all some elaborate trick. What I see, Alessandro said coldly, is a woman wearing diamonds that don't belong to her standing next to the woman they were stolen from. What I see is a family that has systematically abused one of their own. And what I see is someone who believes in magic standing in a dress that certainly appears magical to me. He turned to me. Alara, would you do me the honor of joining me for dinner? I believe we have much more to discuss. It was a royal invitation, not a request, and it was extended publicly in front of everyone, making it a statement of support. Clarissa's face turned purple. Veronica looked like she might cry or scream. Victoria had the good sense to look ashamed. And my father finally found his voice. Alessandro, Your Highness, please, this is a family matter. Surely. No, I said, cutting him off. It stopped being a family matter when you let your wife steal my inheritance and your stepdaughters destroy my mother's memory. It stopped being a family matter when you chose them over your own daughter every single day for 12 years. I turned to Alessandro. I would be honored to join you for dinner, Your Highness. Alessandro, he corrected with a small smile. And perhaps you could tell me more about these fairy tales you love so much. I'm beginning to think there might be more truth in them than I realized. As he led me away from the dance floor, I heard Clarissa's voice behind us, shrill and desperate. This isn't over, Alara. You can't just... But I didn't hear the rest because at that moment the ballroom doors burst open with a sound like thunder. My fairy godmother had arrived. She didn't materialize quietly this time. She arrived with all the drama and fury of a summer storm, the air around her crackling with power. Her gown was even more spectacular than before, woven from lightning and starlight, shifting colors with every movement. Her wand pulsed with energy that made the chandeliers swing and the candle flames dance. Every person in that ballroom felt it, the presence of something ancient and powerful, something that made the primitive part of their brains remember that magic was real and that some forces were not to be trifled with. Did someone say this wasn't over? The fairy godmother asked, her voice resonating through the ballroom like a bell. Because I believe it's only just beginning. Clarissa had gone from purple to white, her eyes wide with terror. Veronica and Victoria had frozen in place. My father looked like he might faint. A fairy godmother, Alessandro breathed, beside me. An actual fairy godmother. I told you I believed in magic, I said softly. The fairy godmother walked across the ballroom floor, and with each step, the marble beneath her feet transformed briefly into a carpet of flowers, night-blooming jasmine and moonflowers, my mother's favorites. She stopped in front of Clarissa. You, she said, and the single word carried the weight of centuries, are a thief. You stole from a grieving child. You destroyed precious memories out of spite. You mocked her love of stories and magic while wearing jewelry that wasn't yours. And you thought there would be no consequences. I don't know what you are, Clarissa stammered, but I won't be threatened and... Threatened? The fairy godmother laughed, and it was not a pleasant sound. Oh, my dear woman, I'm not threatening you. I'm simply showing everyone what you really are. She waved her wand, and suddenly, hovering in the air above Clarissa's head, images began to appear. Memories, pulled from Clarissa's own mind and projected for all to see. We saw her plotting to marry my father for his money. We saw her systematically removing my mother's belongings from the house. We saw her encouraging her daughters to destroy my things. We saw her forging documents to claim my mother's jewelry as her own. We saw her dropping the necklace from the window with a smile. Every cruelty, every calculated act of malice displayed for hundreds of witnesses. Stop it, Clarissa shrieked, trying to grab at the images, but her hands passed through them like smoke. Stop it, please. Why, Nia? The fairy godmother asked. Are you ashamed? You should be, because now everyone knows exactly what you are. She turned to the crowd. Let it be known and spread far and wide that Clarissa Thorne is a thief, a liar, and an abuser of children. She wears stolen diamonds and pretends to be something she's not. And her daughters, she looked at Veronica and Victoria, are following in her footsteps. More images appeared. Veronica buying her Oxford essay, Victoria destroying my mother's antique book, both of them laughing as they tore pages from my fairy tale collections. And then one final image. Veronica in our kitchen in my first life, dropping poison into my morning tea with a smile. That hasn't happened yet, the fairy godmother said, her voice dropping to something dangerous. But it will. In 6 months, when Alara takes her Oxford entrance examination, this one, she pointed at Veronica, plans to poison her. Just as she planned it in another life, another timeline. Murder. To steal her sister's future. The ballroom erupted in chaos. Gasps, shouts of horror, people pulling out phones to call the police. Veronica tried to run but found herself frozen in place by the fairy godmother's magic. No, Veronica whimpered. No, I wasn't. I wouldn't. But you would, the fairy godmother said. You already have, in a sense, and you would again. The intent is there in your heart. I can see it. She turned to the prince. Your Highness, I apologize for disrupting your ball, but I thought you should know the true character of the family that sought your favor tonight. Alessandro was staring at the images, his face a mask of controlled fury. I owe you thanks, not an apology, he said, and my protection to Alara, if she'll accept it. That's generous, the fairy godmother said, but unnecessary. Alara doesn't need protection. What she needs is justice, and that, she smiled, that fierce ancient smile, is what I'm here to provide. She waved her wand again, and this time the magic struck Clarissa, Veronica, and Victoria directly. Nothing dramatic happened, no lightning bolts, no transformations, but I saw their faces change as they realized what had been done. I've given you a gift, the fairy godmother said. Honesty. For the next year, you will be unable to lie, unable to deceive, unable to hide your true natures. Every cruel thought, every selfish impulse, every bit of malice in your hearts, you'll speak it aloud before you can stop yourselves. The world will see you exactly as you are. Clarissa immediately tried to protest, but what came out instead was, I hate that brat, I always have. I only married her father for his money and the house. She clapped her hands over her mouth, eyes wide with horror. Exactly, the fairy godmother said with satisfaction. Now, as for restitution... Another wave of her wand and documents appeared in the air, legal documents, glowing with magical light. These are the true ownership papers for all of Alara's mother's belongings, magically verified and legally binding. The jewelry, the house, which was left to Alara in her mother's will but hidden by her father, the trust fund that was supposed to be hers at 18, all of it, restored and protected. She turned to my father. And you enabled all of this. You let your daughter be abused because you were too weak to stand up to your new wife. What punishment fits such cowardice? My father finally found his voice. Please, I'm sorry, Alara, I'm so sorry. Are you? I asked quietly. Or are you just sorry that you got caught? He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The truth, apparently, was too damning. I thought so, I said. Here's what's going to happen, Father. You're going to sign over the house to me. My mother's house, which should have been mine anyway. You're going to restore every penny of my trust fund. You're going to publicly acknowledge what you let happen to me. And then you're going to leave my life forever. And if I refuse? He asked, but his voice was small. The fairy godmother smiled. Then I'll turn you into a toad. Don't think I won't. I've done it before. She probably would have too. My father signed the magical documents that appeared before him. His hands were shaking, but he signed. Everything, the house, the money, the jewelry, transferred to me in an instant, legally and magically binding. Now get out, I said, all of you, and take your honesty curse with you. Maybe if you spend a year unable to lie, you'll learn what it means to be a decent person. Though I doubt it. Security was already moving in, alerted by the chaos and the prince's subtle signal. They escorted my stepfamily out of the ballroom, Clarissa still trying to speak, and being horrified by every truth that came tumbling out. I hope they all rot, she was saying as they led her away. I hope Alara dies alone and miserable. Oh God, why can't I stop talking? I stole the silver from her mother's grave. The doors closed behind them, cutting off her voice. The ballroom was silent for a long moment. Then slowly, applause began. It started with one person, then another, then the entire ballroom was clapping and cheering. For me, for justice, for the underdog who had finally won. The fairy godmother walked over to me and took my hands. Well done, my dear. You stood up for yourself. You claimed what was yours. Your mother would be so proud. Will I see you again? I asked. Oh, probably not. My job here is done. You don't need a fairy godmother anymore, Alara. You never really did. You just needed to remember that you were allowed to fight back. She squeezed my hands. But I'll always be watching. And if you ever truly need me, you know how to call. She released my hands and stepped back. Now, I believe you have a ball to enjoy, and a prince to get to know better. She winked at Alessandro. Treat her well, Your Highness. She's special. I'm beginning to realize that, Alessandro said with a slight smile. And then, just like that, the fairy godmother was gone, dissolving into starlight and moonbeams, back to wherever fairy godmothers go when they're not granting wishes or dispensing justice. The rest of the ball passed in a blur of wonder. Alessandro and I spent hours talking, dancing, and laughing. He was fascinated by my knowledge of fairy tales and folklore, and I was charmed by his intelligence and genuine kindness. He wasn't just looking for a pretty face or a good political connection. He wanted someone interesting, someone real. He found that in me. But this isn't a simple love story. Yes, Alessandro and I grew close that night. And yes, in the months that followed, we began a genuine romance that would eventually lead to marriage. But that's not the revenge, not really. The revenge, the real, satisfying, poetic revenge, came in the months that followed the ball as the consequences of that night rippled outward like stones in a pond. Within days, Clarissa's honesty curse had destroyed her social standing completely. Every bridge she'd burned, every person she'd manipulated, every cruel secret she'd kept, all of it came spilling out. Her friends abandoned her. Her social circle evaporated. Within a week, she was persona non grata in every venue that mattered. Veronica's planned attempt to poison me never happened, of course. With the plot exposed and the police investigating, she was arrested on conspiracy charges. The evidence was complicated to explain in court. Magical visions aren't typically admissible, but her own honest confessions, courtesy of the curse, sealed her fate. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison and a lifetime of being known as someone who tried to murder her stepsister for a scholarship. The scholarship went to me instead. Oxford welcomed me with open arms, fascinated by the mysterious heiress who arrived at a ball like something from a fairy tale. I deferred for a year to settle my affairs and to see where things went with Alessandro, but I did eventually attend. My thesis on the intersection of folk magic and fairy tales became a best-selling book. Victoria, the younger stepsister, actually learned something from the whole ordeal. The honesty curse forced her to confront her own participation in tormenting me, and to my surprise, she eventually sought me out to offer a genuine apology. We're not close, we'll never be close, but I accepted her apology. She's trying to be better, and that's more than I can say for the rest of them. My father lost everything. The house was mine, the money was mine, and his reputation was destroyed by his association with Clarissa and his own public cowardice. Last I heard, he was living in a small apartment across town, working a job he hates and drowning in regret. He tried to reach out several times, but I never responded. Some bridges, once burned, should stay ashes. As for me, I got everything I wanted and more. I got my mother's house back and restored it to its former glory, including her garden. I planted new roses and reading to them from her old fairy tale books. I got my education, I got justice, and yes, I got my prince. Alessandro and I were engaged within a year and married the year after that. The wedding was covered by media around the world, the fairy tale princess, they called me. If only they knew how literal that title was. But the best revenge, the sweetest revenge, wasn't any of those things. It was knowing that I had been right all along. Magic was real. Fairy tales could come true, good could triumph over evil, and the girl who never stopped believing, even when everyone mocked her, even when she was broken and hurt and dying, that girl got her happily ever after. 5 years later, I stood in my mother's garden again, now restored to beauty beyond even my memories. The roses bloomed in impossible colors, touched by residual magic from that night. My daughter, 3 years old, named after my mother, played among the flowers, chasing butterflies and laughing. Alessandro sat beside me on the garden bench, reading through my latest manuscript. I'd written another book, this one a memoir of sorts, though I'd changed the names and left out certain impossible details. It was called Believing in Magic, a True Fairy Tale. Do you think people will believe it? He asked, closing the manuscript. Does it matter? I responded. The ones who need to believe will believe. The ones who want to mock will mock. I can't control that. No regrets? He asked. About how it all turned out? I thought about that question, about my stepfamily scattered and broken, about my father, alone and regretful, about the fairy godmother I'd never seen again, though I sometimes felt her presence in the garden at midnight. No regrets, I said finally. Except maybe one, that I didn't believe in myself sooner, that I let them make me feel small for so long. But you found your way back, Alessandro said, taking my hand. That's what matters. Our daughter ran up to us then, holding a flower she'd picked. Mama, Mama, is this magic? I took the flower, a night-blooming jasmine, just like the ones that had appeared under the fairy godmother's feet, and smiled. Everything is magic, sweetheart, if you believe in it. I believe, she declared with the absolute certainty only a 3-year-old can muster. I believe in magic and fairies and happy endings. Then you'll have all of those things, I promised her. As long as you never let anyone tell you that believing makes you foolish. The people who mock magic are usually the ones who need it most but are too afraid to reach for it. That night, after our daughter was asleep and Alessandro was reviewing diplomatic papers in his study, I went back to the garden. I stood in the spot where I'd performed the summoning ritual 5 years before, and I whispered into the darkness, "Thank you for everything, for believing in me when no one else did, for showing me that magic is real and that fairy tales can come true." The wind rustled through the roses, carrying a scent like starlight and moonbeams. And somewhere in the darkness, I could have sworn I heard a voice like music reply, "You did it yourself, dear child. You always had the magic. I just reminded you how to use it." The wind died down, and I was alone again in the garden. But I wasn't truly alone. I had my daughter, my husband, my future. I had my mother's legacy, preserved and honored. I had my stories, my books, my voice. And I had the knowledge that somewhere in the world there were other girls who loved fairy tales, who believed in magic, who were being mocked and told they were foolish dreamers. Maybe some of them would read my book. Maybe some of them would remember that believing in magic isn't childish, it's powerful. Maybe some of them would learn, as I did, that the real magic isn't in fairy godmothers or glass slippers or enchanted vehicles. The real magic is in refusing to let the world kill your sense of wonder. The real magic is in believing that you deserve better, that justice exists, that good can triumph over evil. The real magic is in never giving up on your dreams, even when everyone around you says, you should. Epilogue, 10 years later. I'm writing this from my office at Oxford University, where I'm now a tenured professor of folklore and mythology. My book became a bestseller, then a movie. They had to tone down the magic for mainstream audiences, ironically. The film won several awards and inspired a generation of young women to study folklore and believe in their own stories. Clarissa died 3 years ago. The honesty curse had finally been lifted after the promised year, but by then the damage was done. She'd spent her final years alone, bitter and filled with regret. I didn't attend the funeral. Neither did Veronica or Victoria. Veronica got out of prison after serving her full sentence. She tried to rebuild her life but found that having attempted murderer on your record makes things difficult. Last I heard, she was working minimum wage jobs and living paycheck to paycheck, the opposite of the life she tried to steal from me. Sometimes justice comes from the courts, and sometimes it comes from karma. Victoria, and this genuinely surprises me, became a social worker specializing in helping children in abusive family situations. She reached out to me a few years ago, and we had coffee. She's done genuine work on herself, seeing therapists and trying to understand how she became someone who could participate in cruelty. We're not friends exactly, but we're not enemies either. Some people can change. It's rare, but it happens. My father tried to reconcile many times over the years. I finally agreed to meet him once, 5 years after the ball. He apologized. He cried. He told me he regretted everything, and I believed him. But I also told him that some things can't be fixed and some relationships can't be restored. He had his chance to be my father, and he chose Clarissa instead. That choice had consequences. We haven't spoken since. As for Alessandro and me, we're still happy. Deliriously so. We have 3 children now, our oldest daughter, named after my mother, and twin boys who are already showing signs of inheriting their mother's love of stories. We split our time between his principality and our home here, my mother's house, restored and expanded, filled with books and laughter and love. I still have my glass slippers, displayed in a place of honor. They no longer glow with magic that faded over time, but they remind me of the night everything changed. The night I stopped being a victim and became the heroine of my own story. I never saw my fairy godmother again, but sometimes, on nights of the new moon, I feel her presence. A whisper of starlight, a sense of approval, a reminder that magic is always available to those who believe. My students ask me sometimes if I really believe in magic, or if it's just an academic interest. I tell them what I told my daughter. Everything is magic if you believe in it. The skeptics roll their eyes and the dreamers lean forward, hungry for more. Those are the seesaw. Students I pay special attention to, the ones who still believe. Because they're the ones who might one day need to remember that fairy tales aren't just stories. They're instruction manuals, they're maps to surviving impossible situations. They're proof that the underdog can win, that justice exists, and that believing in magic isn't foolish, it's essential. I often think about what my life would have been if I hadn't died and been reborn, if I hadn't gotten that second chance. Veronica would have killed me. She would have stolen my scholarship. Clarissa would have kept my mother's jewelry and house. My father would have continued enabling their abuse. And no one would have ever known the truth. But I did get a second chance. I did summon a fairy godmother. I did fight back, and I won. That's what I want people to understand. Fairy tales aren't about waiting for someone to rescue you. The best fairy tales are about rescuing yourself. They're about refusing to accept injustice, about fighting for what you deserve, about believing in your own power, even when the whole world tells you you're powerless. My family mocked my love for fairy tales. They called me childish, foolish, ridiculous. They tried to kill the part of me that believed in magic and wonder and happy endings. They stopped mocking when I proved them wrong. They stopped mocking when I summoned a fairy godmother and reclaimed everything they'd stolen. They stopped mocking when I got my fairy tale ending, not because a prince saved me, but because I saved myself. And that, my dear readers, is the most important lesson any fairy tale can teach. The magic was inside you all along. You just have to believe in it. And maybe, just maybe, if you believe hard enough on a night of the new moon, in a place of deep emotional significance with the right ingredients and the right words, maybe a fairy godmother will appear for you too. But even if she doesn't, you have everything you need to be your own fairy godmother. You have your voice, your strength, your refusal to accept injustice, and your belief that you deserve better. That's all the magic you need. That's all the magic you've ever needed. Believe in it.